a different app because earlier I gave a talk for about 2 hours and I lost about 1 hour and 15 minutes of it from the recording. It was on the Mangala Sutta, so we lost it. So only 45 minutes was, fortunately, we were able to have that much. So it's a good lesson, a reminder in anicca. So the key thing to remember with metta practice, because I've noticed what I'm about to say is a response to how metta has been perceived in the world of Dhamma teachings. Many traditions within Theravada. Unfortunately, we have many traditions within Theravada, which is very odd. I was looking at different branches or different centers in, for example, Australia, I will be heading towards next. And I saw, I looked at the Theravada temples, and underneath it, there's parentheses. And the parentheses are indicating which branch of Theravada it is, and usually they're saying this so-called teacher's tradition, new teacher, like of the last, century. It is unfortunate to have that because we have only one teacher, Lord Buddha. Especially when we claim to be Theravada tradition, we have a duty to claim that and not bring in my teacher, that teacher, and say, I am a follower of that school of Theravada, which is silly. Unfortunately, that is what's happening in the world. So, similarly, when we come across metta practice, different traditions have come up with their own different ways of looking at metta, and usually it's in the form of a downgraded version of the Dhamma, almost watered down Dhamma. In fact, metta has been conceived to be something that is preserved or reserved for the latter portion of the retreat. Maybe one day at the most, but usually a few hours or a few minutes. We meditate, and then finally the last 5 minutes we dedicate to metta practice. That is, if we had the word blasphemy in Buddhism, that would be blasphemous. Because every single practice that Lord Buddha taught, every single technique that Lord Buddha taught, had within it metta. Every single bhikkhu, in order for you to become an arahant, you must have within your spine, within your heart, metta. In fact, even such chief disciples, such as in the case of, when I say chief, Venerable Mahakassapa, for example, he was known as the most austere, secluded, even though he had his own students, but he was very much to himself kind of a thing, had that lifestyle. But you look at his life and it's spewing with metta. Venerable Revata, who was known to be the most recluse type, he would be practicing the Dhutangas, serious tapa. But when you see them with the other chief disciples, there's so much love. In fact, metta is so strong, it's so powerful, that Lord Buddha talks about it again and again and again and again in the suttas. And that's what I have been discovering in my work with the sutta translations that I've been doing, retranslating the suttas. Now, what we also need to do is retranslate or reintroduce metta. Now, why do I say this? For the last 60, 80 years, people have been talking about anapanasati or satipatthana. And within Buddhist meditation circles, if you're a real dedicated meditator, you don't mess around with metta. You go straight to the satipatthana. That is the underlying motif. Then people will take you seriously as if this is complete nonsense. Complete nonsense, because you cannot practice the satipatthana and truly gain results without practicing metta. Now, how do you practice metta is key. Satipatthana has to be in everything that we practice. Even when you're doing maranasati, contemplation of death, or looking at patikula or repulsive nature of things, like food or this or that, you must have sati. Now, when that is the approach, they become like the two sides of the same coin, taking you onto the bus. I use the metaphor of a bus or nibbana in this case. Because you cannot be rigid and attain nibbana. Nibbana is real. But chances are, in this life, with all of the stuff that they keep throwing at us, the terror, the losses, constant losses, loved ones who are no longer going to be the same. I hear this every single day. I just heard from you. Yesterday, I heard from my cousin. Everybody's stunned. They're hearing, oh, so-and-so is losing his health or dying or dead, or they're not themselves. There's fear. Earlier, we were talking about the Mangala Sutta and how there's that verse in the Mangala Sutta. Kuttasya loka dhammehi yassa chittang nirkampati. When hit by the upheavals, fluctuations of life, the mind stays stainless, unshakable. Chittam nakampati. It doesn't get jolted, but we are all jolted to the point where we have forgotten how to give love to ourselves. Now is the time for us to feel again, to feel metta, first towards ourselves. And there's no shame in that. Now, metta is the doorway to nibbana. You can think of it like that. Because if I am sitting on a retreat, let's say Satipatthana retreat, and it's like a gung-ho, I'm serious meditator, yes, I'm pushing and pushing. All you're going to get is a headache and frustration at the end of that hour, at the end of that week, at the end of that retreat. So we need to learn how to utilize, when you are going through the bodily postures, or even when you're practicing the breath, maintaining metta is crucial there. Not treating it as a machine. You have to have the softness. Even the way your sati touches the object of meditation, it needs to be soft. Earlier, I was mentioning to you how we do not resist nor push, which is the sickness that every meditator suffers from. Especially when you have tasted something wonderful in the sit. It might be in the same sit, during that same time, suddenly you go, "Ah, where did you go? Come back. Let me try the same tricks so I can regain that feeling of, let's say, equanimity, upekka. Or where did my metta go? Or where did my tranquility go?" So the approach that we have has everything to do with the presence or absence of metta. The moment you add metta, every single, I don't care what type of practice you're doing, what type of technique you're doing that Lord Buddha talked about. He talked about many techniques, as you know, but one of the big ones is metta. But he constantly talked about sati. In fact, I was trying to formulate, like, what could I, if somebody would ask me, Bhante, what is the one thing that if you narrow down the Dhamma to, what is that one thing that if you remove it, everything collapses? Sati. It's everything. And that's why I don't agree with modern translators who translate Satipatthana or Mahasatipatthana Sutta as when Lord Buddha says, Ekayano Maggo. Ekayano, they translate that as the direct path or a direct path, a direct path out of many. That's the modern day, the integrated version of watering down everything so that we don't insult anyone. But we're sacrificing the Dhamma. Ekayano means one and only. There's nothing else that leads us to Nibbana. Nothing. Therefore, sati must be present even in metta. Essential for metta. And that's when your practice will grow. Otherwise, how will you know if you are not radiating metta to your spiritual friend or even to yourself? Maybe you're dozing off and lost in just emotionality or memories. That is different than radiating metta and feeling it reverberate in your heart. Does that answer your question? Did you have another question? We can, you can, please feel free to ask questions. We'll wait because the rain is pouring outside. So if there are any questions, welcome. Pleasure. Well, Friday is difficult for many people. So that's why this retreat, I wanted it to be more, not to be so, we were saying, rigid, because many people are struggling these days with schedules and things. So I wanted to mention that crucial fact about how metta has been seen. And for that reason, unfortunately, humanity is being lost from within the Sangha. From within the Sangha. Because metta and Dhamma and Sangha are the same, because that was what Lord Buddha represents. So we cannot separate them. So I wanted to talk today about, well, what is Lord Buddha? The position. Teacher. Today in the world, we have many, many, many teachers. And unfortunately, we have many who are itching to become teachers. Students who are itching before even they are true students, they want to have a following. I noticed this in the United States. I noticed this in Europe. I noticed this everywhere. Individuals who have approached me 1 or 2 meetings, and then I see that that's what they want. Could you show me the tricks so that I can have my own students? But what are you going to teach? Do you know what it means to be a student? Do you know the nobility, the beauty, the humility of being a student? When you're a student, you have the capacity to be like a sponge. But you have to be like a sponge, not a brick. So, but this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on even before Lord Buddha. But because this was happening over and over again, including within the Sangha circles, Lord Buddha wanted to help lay people by introducing them to the criteria that allows them to truly investigate and really understand what to look for in a teacher. But Lord Buddha did not point the finger at so-and-so teacher. He led by example. That's why he is the greatest of teachers. He pointed at himself. He scrutinized himself. He criticized. He referred to himself. He didn't criticize himself, but he left himself for people to look at and see if truly he has a behavior that is questionable. That shows the level of humility. I don't know of any teacher, Buddhist teacher, especially Theravada teacher, a live teacher, who says that today, to my knowledge. I hope there are, of course, that's my hope. And that's what we need to strive towards, especially after reading or going over this very precious sutta. I have covered this in the past. It's the Vīmaṁsaka Sutta. Vīmaṁsaka Sutta. It's the examination sutta. It's from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 47. Several years ago, I covered it. But in my travels in the recent years, especially during the last 3 years or so, teaching the Dhamma, coming across so many students and some teachers, I feel the need for us to revisit, especially to give the tools for lay people to have in their hand to see that this is not something made up. This comes straight from Lord Buddha's mouth, giving you the tools to investigate and examine, is it really just for me to follow this so-and-so teacher, whether in person or online? Whether this person truly lives by example or not? And whether you have the right to even ask whether this teacher is legitimate or not. You see, simply because we wear robes, we have our heads shaved, does not mean that you must absolutely pay us respect. That's where we come with the Vīmaṁsaka Sutta to elaborate on this as to why and how. How do we approach this subject, which is, some people are afraid to even talk that culturally, traditionally, etc. But remember, this path of Dhamma is based on wisdom, first and foremost. Wisdom must be with you. It's not by simply blindly following some tradition. Remember, we all talk about the Kalama Sutta. Every single Buddhist, every single serious Buddhist at least, knows about Kalama Sutta. And when you ask them, and they say, oh, Lord Buddha said you have to test it, it's basically ehipassiko. Okay, but what? Ehipassiko what? See what? Test what? That they don't know. Because in it, Lord Buddha clearly designates as to, it is not by the eloquence of the teacher, the following of the teacher, the fame of the teacher, the renown of the teacher, how your relatives or friends or people you know who you respect, respecting that teacher, therefore you must respect them also. None of those things. We know Kalama Sutta, but we don't live by it. And that's the culture we live in. Everybody tries to quote some article, some science journal. They just quote the headline, the title of it. When you ask them about the content, the findings, they're clueless. Even the conclusion, they're clueless. We have become parrots. And here in this sutta, Lord Buddha teaches us to grow a spine, to have courage, and not be afraid. That's why when I read a sutta like this, I take a breath of fresh air. I feel alive, and I feel like my questions are legitimate and have been legitimate. I don't have to follow anyone simply because others are following, simply because they have millions and millions of followers around the world. No. I wonder how many of us would be able to recognize Lord Buddha if we see him. Let's say if we go into, let's say, time machine, and they could take us back to Savatthi or anywhere where he was. He won't have that hair, you know, he won't have that crown. So he's indistinguishable from other bhikkhus. He has a shaven head. How do you identify Lord Buddha? They weren't wearing name tags. And when they sat, when Lord Buddha gave a talk, or they were just sitting to meditate, he wasn't always where he was at the front or at the top on a pedestal. You would have to walk around and ask, because it was first come, first served type of a space arrangement. Who would sit wherever it was available? So sometimes Lord Buddha would come in late. Other bhikkhus were there. So how would we know? How would we identify? Because we have become too reliant on what we see and what we hear. We have forgotten how to feel. Again, this brings us back to the importance of metta, joined with sati, and that is Dhamma. That is Dhamma. So this gives us the power, the legitimacy to ask and not to be afraid, because the one who's giving us the authority to ask, again, asking with kindness, wisdom, and metta, not to go poking around to find fault with someone. That is not the goal here. But when your heart says, I'm noticing something strange about this teacher, instead of you blaming yourself that I should not be having these thoughts, stop. Why are you having these thoughts now, these feelings now? Is it based on something you saw, you heard, you witnessed yourself? And then check with the Vīmaṁsaka Sutta. So let's begin. Majjhima Nikaya number 47, Vīmaṁsaka Sutta. Examination. I have personally heard this. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the monastery offered by Anathapindika at Jeta's Park in the city of Savatthi. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus and said, Bhikkhus, yes, Bhante, replied the bhikkhus present. Bhikkhus, the bhikkhu who desires to know and examine someone, but who lacks the ability to blend his own mind with another's mind. To clearly observe their inner thoughts, should carefully examine and scrutinize the Tathagata in order to see for himself whether he is perfectly awakened or not. Blending one's own mind with another, it's another way of saying what we commonly use now, the term telepathy. to be able to see and to join the other's mind, to see what the other person is thinking, what's going on there in their mind, to consciously become aware without exchange of words, even without the eyesight of looking at them or them looking at you, to see psychic abilities and things like that. In those days, it was so common. And sometimes when I mention these things, sometimes some students are taken aback because they're like, oh, this is almost like magic. I didn't come to the Dhamma because of these things. They sound like magic. It's fairy tale. They're not, they're real. Again, unfortunately, because we live in this integrated society structure that keeps downplaying and watering down the Dhamma, that's a natural, unfortunate consequence of people, of teachers making excuses and even apologizing for the Dhamma or statements. Some teachers are even avoiding such sentences from talking about it, explaining it. But these are real. When you practice meditation, when you practice metta or satipatthana, we were talking about those two primarily. If you're doing it right and if your sila is intact, you will not be the same person as you were yesterday. Now, with some people, especially when there is proper concentration techniques applied, the mind will expand. It will experience certain things in a different way. Subtle things will become gross. It will become more manifest to you. So even things that you would have read about and not believe suddenly will begin happening to you. But then you're not reading about it, you are experiencing it. And that's how those who have experienced the Dhamma have the ability to see things that others do not. So Lord Buddha is talking about that. If the person lacks the ability to see and scrutinize the mind of the Tathagata, should carefully examine. And the bhikkhus responded, Bhante, we are anchored in our learning on the Blessed One himself, for he is our guide and refuge. When they say this in suttas, you come across them sometimes, what they're saying is, Bhante, we don't know the answer. Could you please help us? To this end, we request that the Blessed Lord please clarify the meaning of what he stated, as this would greatly benefit the bhikkhus who will remember and carry it in their hearts, once having learned it from the Blessed One himself. Well then, bhikkhus, listen and pay careful attention to what I shall say. Yes, Lord, replied the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, when the bhikkhu who desires to know or examine someone closely, but who lacks the ability to blend his own mind with another's mind, to clearly observe their inner thoughts, he should carefully examine and scrutinize the Tathagata in two ways. Again, he's referring to himself. He's not saying go and, with the other teachers, he's not saying go and Nigantanata Putta, Mahavir, go and check him, expose him. He's using himself as a target. That is, by observing him through the eyes and ears. First watch, see, what is he doing? And then hear, listen carefully to his words, to his behaviors. In other words, the bhikkhu scrutinizes to see whether he could see or hear any evidence in the Tathagata's behavior that reveals the presence of any defilements within him, any kilesas. And after having examined the Tathagata thus, the bhikkhu reaches the conclusion there are no defilements found within the Tathagata that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. So I've checked with my eyes, I've checked with my ears. There's nothing, no stains in the character of the teacher. But you have tested it. You have given yourself the permission to look carefully, investigate. I used to have a teacher once where I found myself and other students, fellow students, constantly making excuses for the behavior of the teacher. We were sitting and trying to make sense of what we saw and heard, justifying, in essence, the behavior of the teacher, because the behavior was adhamma, sadly. Now, that's not just one example. I mean, I'm sorry, that is one example from me, but there are countless examples that people have about teachers, certain teachers. And there is this cumulative sense of guilt if you even bring it up. Because I myself started making excuses when another student came and said, "Did you see what that teacher said? How he reacted when this person, a layperson, raised a question respectfully. And the teacher tried to answer it, but not answer it. Tried to draw a veil or fog around it because he didn't have an answer. And then when the student still respectfully said, Bhante, he yelled at him. The teacher yelled at him and made fun of him in front of all these people. And some people even began to laugh. This might have been the only time that this person might have felt the need to really connect to the Dhamma. And there was a fissure, there was a breach, there was a cut. Who knows where that person is now? I hope he's still practicing, because that completely destroys one's interest, because here you have a respectable teacher, but they just made fun of you as if you're in high school, bullied by other students your age. That obviously is telling you with your eyes and ears some things that are completely adhamma. Having tested and known this firsthand, the bhikkhu then investigates him further by trying to see if there are any signs or evidence of confusion or inconsistencies found within the Tathagata's behavior that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. Any inconsistencies. And after having examined the Tathagata thus, the bhikkhu reaches the conclusion: there are no signs or evidence of confusion or inconsistencies found within the Tathagata that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. I remember in the 80s and 90s, there were many gurus. In fact, I saw a poster once from before my time, from the 60s and 70s, in San Francisco. How to become a guru. A workshop to make you a guru with a following. 60s and 70s was the perfect time, still is. Then you had people like Rajneesh and Osho, the same person basically. And different teachers come up, Satguru and all these people coming up nowadays. Excellent at sandwiching the truth. Sandwiching is a term that psychotherapists use. Basically, if you're going to say something that you know your client is not going to like, instead of just bulldozing that at them, just throwing that at them, and you know they're going to storm out of your office and never see them again, never benefit from you again. What you can do is you can sweet talk your way in. You can point out certain complimentary things about them. I really like the way you do this. I really like the way you do this. This is it. Those are like the sandwich, lettuce, tomato, cheese. But then you have to put the meat, as they say. That becomes the thing which you have to say, which is kind of like, or vice versa. It could be the fact that they don't like lettuce, but they like the meat. So you put that, but you also squeeze in other things that they don't like. So these are metaphors, of course. So that's what these gurus do, to confuse the person, because you remember the good things that they said. but you don't remember the other things. You don't want to remember. Because one thing I used to notice about Rajneesh, because I used to read his books and things in those days, you would read one thing and he presents it beautifully. He was excellent at rhetoric, by the way. He was the top of his university in philosophy, in argumentation. So he knew how to play with words. Lord Buddha calls these characters eel wrigglers. In those days, they existed. They still do in the world, not only in India. Eel wrigglers, if you've seen an eel, it's very slippery. It's like a slippery soap or something, but it's longer. You cannot hold it. These characters are like that. They will say one thing, and then the next page, they say something completely opposite and defend it. Meanwhile, you're going and scratching your head like, but what is the truth? So Lord Buddha is saying, there must be consistency in what you're saying with what your behavior is. And this is what I also have been telling, even in the capacity in the past of a therapist. A person comes and says, but I love this person. I say, why? They say, because they say these things, they say these beautiful things, and they promise me this and that. And I say, do they deliver? Well, that's not important. Why? Because they've done some good things, doctor. Okay, but why not always? A long time ago, a person who was also a therapist said, trust the behavior, never the words. Trust the behavior, meaning the action of the person. So Lord Buddha is saying, see and scrutinize the teacher, including the Tathagata himself, while looking at his behavior. Having tested and known this firsthand, the bhikkhu then investigates him further by trying to see if the Tathagata truly has within him undefiled and pure states that can be scrutinized, whether through observations made with the eyes or ears. And after having examined the Tathagata thus, the bhikkhu reaches the conclusion there are indeed undefiled and pure states found within the Tathagata that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. Because what they're seeing is the Tathagata's behavior matches his words. If he's saying, be kind to animals, when you see him walk and you see a cow pass by or a dog pass by, he does not kick the dog or the cow. He might even smile to the cow. Or how he treats other bhikkhus and monks with humility. One time there was a gathering of bhikkhus that had come from far to pay their respects to Lord Buddha. But there's a rule in the Vinaya where if you are a novice monk and you have bhikkhus coming, you, out of courtesy, you give your kuti to the bhikkhu. So Rahula, Lord Buddha's son, was alive then. And he was, I don't believe he was an arahant then. He was still young, a teenager. And he sees the other Mahatheras there, so he leaves his room and gives them the kuti. Now, because his father happens to be the Buddha, where is he going to go? He's not going to sleep outside. So he goes and sleeps right outside the door of the bathroom, the toilet. Now, Lord Buddha, every time he would walk out of his door, if he sensed anything outside, or if he walked into his own toilet, he would always clear his throat intentionally. So that if somebody's there, by accident or whatever, they could back. So he notices someone's there. I mean, it's Lord Buddha. And he clears his throat. And Rahula from the other side, outside the door, he goes clearing his throat. Lord Buddha opens the door and he says, "What are you doing here? You have your own kuti." And he says, "Bhante," he didn't say dad. He said, "Bhante, new bhikkhus, visitors came, and I had to give my kuti." The reason why I recall this incident is because of the humility. This is the king of the Dhamma, Lord Buddha himself. He doesn't waltz, he doesn't push and storm out of his room and is like, "Where is my bathroom chamber?" He lived he slept on a low mat. He was the embodiment of kindness and humility. How many bhikkhus do that today? We have to hold them accountable. Fortunately, we have had bhikkhus in our time, contemporary. I was mentioning in the previous talk about Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Mun did not own a single what? A single monastery. Not a one. But every single Thai forest tradition points to Ajahn Mun as the head of the Thai forest tradition. I wonder what Ajahn Mun would do if he were to visit most of the Thai forest tradition temples, where almost all the bhikkhus or anagarikas and all those samaneras are always engaged in building and constructing new temples, big statues. Some of these ajahns, when they die, the cremation takes a year. I was mentioning to someone recently, imagine Lord Buddha's cremation. The students or the followers are trying to out-respect, completely forgetting the example of Lord Buddha. Something is wrong here. There is tremendous teacher worship going on, and the teachers have everything to do with it. They have forgotten their role. A bhikkhu is a bhikkhu, means basically a beggar. Even though we don't beg, the robes we wear, they represent a dead person, you know. The robes came from cremation grounds, from wrapping dead bodies that had to be cleaned afterwards, died again. We forget that today. So this sutta is probably one of the most important suttas that every week must be read, recited, in my opinion, because of the inequity and the unfair treatment that many of us have towards the Dhamma, to appreciate the Dhamma and the role of a teacher. Having tested and known this firsthand, the bhikkhu then investigates further by trying to see if the Venerable One has attained to this noble, to this wholesome Dhamma for a long time or just recently. And after having examined the Venerable One thus, the bhikkhu reaches the conclusion: the Venerable One has attained indeed to this wholesome Dhamma for a long time now, and not just recently. Now Lord Buddha switched. Now he's talking about fellow bhikkhus. The Venerable One is saying. So you hear about a certain teacher, you go to listen, you go to check them, you spend some time with them, you observe them. Having tested and known this firsthand, the bhikkhu then investigates further by trying to see if the Venerable One has acquired fame and renown, and whether there are present in his heart the dangers associated with acquiring fame and renown. If there's any, again, if the bhikkhu is unable to see the mind, to really penetrate, Then you can observe with your eyes and ears, Lord Buddha is saying. Here, because it is important to consider that so long as the Venerable One has not yet acquired fame and renown, the dangers associated with these two are too early to be detected or found within him. So, you might see a bhikkhu, a teacher, who behaves in a very untouchable way, untouchable by fame, and they cannot be bought by fame, by wealth. They have that air about them. You think, oh, this is a bhikkhu, this is a good teacher who cannot, even though he doesn't have it yet. Lord Buddha is advising us by waiting. He says, wait until he does get fame and renown, and then you'll make your conclusion. It is only after the Venerable One has already acquired fame and renown that the dangers associated with these two may be detected or found within him. And after having examined the Venerable One thus, then the bhikkhu may reach the conclusion, the Venerable One has indeed acquired fame and renown, but the dangers associated with these two are not detected or found within him. There's a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. I forgot, it's not Nandiya. Anyhow, in it, Lord Buddha is addressing at that moment an attendant. And they are had just come to this forest area. And the villagers have found out that Lord Buddha is there. Out of respect, they go and prepare all night food for Dana. And in the morning, early morning, they go, all of them, lay people, to the edge of the monastery. Now, the noise they're doing wakes up everyone, including Lord Buddha, who already wakes up very early. And he calls this attendant and says, what is all this noise outside? And the attendant says, Bhante, it's just the lay people from this village. They want to pay respect. They honor you so much. They venerate you. And the Lord Buddha is so tired of it. You see it in the words he uses. Fame and renown, he says. What curse? He says, he literally uses the words, I cannot even go to the bathroom to urinate without someone following me, without someone wanting to be seeing me. It's like a celebrity status. Now, take that image, take that position that Lord Buddha has, and put it on top, juxtapose it with modern teachers. Won't you see the opposite? Where everybody's pretty much trying to do as whatever they can to gain more following, to gain more supporters, to get more dana, to build a bigger temple. Lord Buddha was doing the opposite. None of the temples had his name on it. Do you know? He didn't have his fingerprint on it. He didn't have his signature, his royal seal. None. Today, unfortunately, you go across the planet. That is a dream that most bhikkhus have. Most. To become someone. This is wrong. That is not why we become bhikkhus. Having tested and known this firsthand, the bhikkhu then investigates further by trying to see if the Venerable One restrains himself from indulging in sensual pleasures. That doesn't just mean sexual pleasures. It's part of it, of course, but all sensual pleasures. As a result of having destroyed lust within himself, or does he merely restrain himself because of fear of being discovered? Are people's eyes on me? Are there cameras watching me? And after having examined the Venerable One, thus the bhikkhu then may reach the conclusion, the Venerable One indeed is restrained from indulging in sensual pleasures, as a result of having destroyed lust within himself, and not because of any fear of being discovered. We must use logic. We use logic and common sense in every part of our lives. But somehow, when it comes to teachers, we give them carte blanche. We say, it's okay, it's okay. No, it's not okay. We are held by strict value system. To keep the Dhamma, to keep the Sasana alive and well and healthy for lay people, not just you, but those in the future generations, because the generation to follow is going to be influenced by you. And if you're being influenced by the teacher, now the new generation, the future generation, is influenced by decrepit teachers if they don't live by the Dhamma. So if I'm ordering that steak, I've seen that. That's why whenever I say, provide examples, they are examples that I have been a witness to, sadly, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. I don't need to eat the second plate of food. There's a thing called common sense and just courtesy. Lay people hold themselves accountable on many things. Bhikkhus don't get special treatment, should not get a special treatment as it relates to the values that you hold to be impeccable as part of a good character, as a good citizen. Those same values we bhikkhus must have and more. That's why we have 227 rules. Lord Buddha tried to protect the purity of the Sangha as best as he could, but human beings are going to be human beings. So long as we have defilements in our hearts, we're going to find ways. Now, bhikkhus, if others should come and ask the examining bhikkhu, and based on what evidence have you concluded that the Venerable One indeed is restrained from indulging in sensual pleasures as a result of having destroyed lust within himself and not because of any fear of being discovered? How do you know they're not faking it? And if he were to answer correctly, the bhikkhu would reply to them by saying, it has been observed that whether the Venerable One is living along with his companions in the holy life or completely alone, whether he is unsupported or being fully supported, or whether instructing others in a crowd or seeing those that are indulging in sensual pleasures, engrossed and defiled by material possessions, or not, nevertheless, the Venerable One does not look down on them. He doesn't treat them differently. For I have heard this in the presence of the Blessed One, as he declared, I behave restrained by not indulging in sensuality, as a result of lust being fully destroyed within me, and not because of fear of being discovered. Those words come from Lord Buddha. He always uses himself as the example, as the rule. I have, I've come from a Christian background as a child. And my uncle happens to be a priest, Christian priest. I laugh because in Christianity or in Judeo-Christian religions, you have priests and you have people who get up and give sermons and things. And within Christian circles, it is a known saying, factual saying, reflecting life, that a priest would go saying something like this: do what I'm saying, don't do what I'm doing. Basically, hypocrisy in action. This Dhamma and discipline does not have room for that. Our Lord Buddha was a perfect example of doing exactly what he did, saying exactly what he said. It has to reflect life. Because there can be, and there are teachers who will treat a person in a different way in public versus in private. We don't do things in secret as Sangha. That means whatever I am doing publicly should not be different when I am doing it in private. Whether there's an ant walking on the ground in front of me or 100 people staring at me, see if I'm doing something wrong or right. It has to be the same attitude on part of the bhikkhu. This tells you of what moved people when they looked at Venerable Sariputta, for example, or any of the other bhikkhus, arahants. They were reflecting, they were living the Dhamma. Then the Tathagata himself may be questioned further on this by asking him directly, are there within the Tathagata any defilements that may be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears? You can go ahead and ask the teacher directly, because Lord Buddha is saying, you can ask me directly. Bhante, do you have any defilements in your heart? It's okay if you have any confusion about it. Then I would respond by saying, there are no defilements within the Tathagata that may be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. You have today students of teachers who claim that their teachers are arahants. Even when you look at them not being that person's teacher, that teacher's student, and you have doubts. One thing that comes to mind is cigarette smoking. Now, depending on which bhikkhus you talk to, this is a hush-hush subject. Most bhikkhus don't like to talk about. But remember earlier I said nothing is done in secret. Well, this is a big, fat, huge thorn on the side of the Sangha, and no one talks about this. Recently, I was in Armenia, and I was, because Armenia is not a Buddhist country, not by a long shot, but they have been opening themselves to the Dhamma. I have several students there. And one person invited me to go and give a talk at an Aikido dojo. I was surprised to see all different ages, from 6-year-olds to 76-year-olds, sitting there wanting to listen. Some of them were family members of the practitioners. And the sensei, or the head of this school, wanted to ask questions, penetrating questions about the Dhamma. And because I happen to be ethnically Armenian and I speak the language, it was very curious for them to see a fellow Armenian who was a Buddhist, not only a Buddhist, but a Buddhist monk, teaching them the Dhamma. So I taught them the Panchasila, the 5 precepts. And at the end, they asked questions about, well, what about smoking? And I said, smoking as well, because it has been proven that it has in the 80s and 90s, it was proven that it has over 37 different types of narcotics, which give you the addiction towards cigarettes, the nicotine. But now it has even more. 30 years ago, I'm talking. So I mentioned that. And then he started to, not disrespectfully, but he wanted to present an alternative way of looking at it. And I said, I understand what you're saying. And I looked over and I saw a little girl sitting there. Dhammadina, you were there. You saw this. You were a witness. And I pointed at her and I said, excuse me, young lady, what's your name? She said, Rosie. And I said, how old are you? She said, I think she said 6 or 8. And I turned to the sensei. And I said, could you look at her? He looked at her. And I said, can you imagine a cigarette in her mouth? He immediately said, no. I said, what happened? Why can't you visualize a cigarette in her mouth? He said, because that's ugly, that's dirty, it's unacceptable. And I said, do you see the discrepancy in your judgment? So similarly, when a teacher says it's okay to smoke as a bhikkhu, I ask them one thing. Well, if the picture of a child with a cigarette doesn't bother them, I ask them, can you imagine Lord Buddha smoking a cigarette? And if they have any conscience, any decency, they will say, absolutely not, Bhante. Well, if it is wrong for Lord Buddha, why is it right for me to do? That's my answer to these bhikkhus and teachers who keep saying, well, it's. Of course, in the past, there have been ajahns in the 20th and the 19th century who didn't know any better, that there are narcotics, that it is addictive. And it keeps you awake and agitated, and it keeps you skinny. All these things are facts about cigarettes because it's nicotine. And then you have the betel nut, right? People chew on it. Well, that's another reason why their teeth fall out. So many ajahns you have without teeth. Well, what kind of a look is that? Lord Buddha never chewed any betel nuts. There's not a single evidence of that. And plus, it's ugly. I've seen ajahns, while they're giving a Dhamma talk, they take their spittle and they spit, which is dreadful to look at, uncivilized. Plus, teeth fall out because the gums have been so receding badly. Well, where is the Dhamma there? Tell me. The behavior of the teacher has to be through and through infused with Dhamma. We don't live for anything else. Recently, I gave a talk, and the title of the talk was basically just that. We wear the robes for only one reason: attain freedom from suffering. Give up everything, not defend. Ill behavior. Then I would, and if the Tathagata were to be asked further, are there any confusions or inconsistencies found within the Tathagata's behavior that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears? Then I would respond by saying, there are no confusions or inconsistencies found within the Tathagata's behavior that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears. And if the Tathagata were to be asked further, are there any undefiled or pure states within the Tathagata that can be scrutinized or observed, whether through the eyes or ears? Then I would respond by saying, undefiled and pure states are indeed found within the Tathagata that can be scrutinized, whether through observations made with the eyes or ears. Furthermore, although these states are my range and scope of experience, nevertheless, I do not identify with them. So, Lord Buddha was awakened. He was an arahant. He does not become identified with any of the jhanas, with the fact that he is an arahant. He does not make a big deal about it. But when someone is asking him, Bhante, have you experienced the first jhana? Without identifying with it, Lord Buddha says, yes. And he would give you instructions. Otherwise, why would you listen to someone who's never experienced it? And Venerable Buddhaghosa, who wrote the book on meditation, Buddhist meditation, the Visuddhimagga, that many cultures, many Buddhist traditions blindly believe. And it is the manual, it is the encyclopedia of meditation in Theravada Buddhism, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because he himself states that he never attained any of those states that he talks about in so much detail. It's like somebody who writes a book on eye surgery, but who's never held a scalpel. He's not even a medical doctor. Doesn't know anything about the eye anatomy. Never held it. Common sense is lacking. Bhikkhus, a disciple desiring to learn the Dhamma should approach a teacher who declares himself in this manner. The teacher will then instruct and teach him the Dhamma sequentially, stage by stage, leading him to more and more exalted states, elucidating and revealing to him its dark and white counterparts, meaning what to watch out for. For example, if you're not practicing metta properly with wisdom, it can easily turn into affection. That's why when we use a spiritual friend, it has certain rules to follow. We have to choose someone of the same gender, someone where we don't have any physical attraction towards, someone who's alive, someone who's not related to us, because if they are related to us, chances are there has been some argument somewhere in the past. And in the depth of meditation, in samadhi, suddenly the mind recalling that memory can kick you out of samadhi. That is a dark side. So the teacher who has gone the road, has gone down the journey, knows the map, and he or she will guide you. That's the job of a teacher. That's why it's a teacher, not to sit there and be a teacher. And as the teacher instructs and explains the Dhamma to the bhikkhu, the time comes whereby the disciple, through his own personal and direct understanding, becomes firmly established in the Dhamma. Then he suddenly and naturally develops the unshakable faith in the Tathagata, as he knows it in his heart. The Blessed One is perfectly awakened. The Dhamma is well proclaimed, and the Sangha of bhikkhus are practicing the holy path. Iti piso bhagava arahan samma sambuddho. That, when Lord Buddha says established in the Dhamma, it means that the person has become at least a Sotapanna. The Dhamma is alive today. It is alive to turn you into at least Sotapannas. Please don't deprive yourselves of that. That's why you are born as a human being. That's why you have come to this path, to this religion, to this culture, come to this hall to listen to this Dhamma. Don't waste this precious time in this body, this human body, which is so rare. Any moment death is there. Any moment we're going to go. We hear about death and sickness all the time, right? We're going to be next. This is nothing like a curse or Bhante, don't say that. No, this is a fact. Every time we would talk about death or somebody would die in our family, like a grandmother or something, or somebody, even neighbors or strangers even, my parents would go, shh, don't say that. Don't talk about death. My grandmother the same. Don't mention death. Why? Isn't that where we're all headed? Is there anyone who skips it? Have you ever known someone who did not die? Now, because if other bhikkhus should come and ask the bhikkhu, and based on what evidence have you concluded that the Blessed One is perfectly awakened, the Dhamma is well proclaimed, and the Sangha of bhikkhus are practicing the holy path? In answering them correctly, the bhikkhu would reply to them by saying, friends, in desiring to learn the Dhamma, I approached the Blessed One, and the teacher instructed and taught me the Dhamma sequentially, stage by stage, leading me to more and more exalted states, elucidating and revealing to me its dark and white counterparts. And as the teacher instructed and explained the Dhamma to me, through my own personal and direct understanding, I became firmly established in the Dhamma. Then I suddenly and naturally developed the unshakable faith in the Tathagata, as I knew in my heart. The Blessed One is perfectly awakened. The Dhamma is well proclaimed, and the Sangha of bhikkhus are practicing the holy path. This is ehipassiko, the person. Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi. The person has walked the path and has tasted it for himself. They are not taking someone else's word for it. He's coming from experience. And the Blessed One continued, bhikkhus, when someone finds in his heart such strong faith, being firmly established in the Tathagata, while using similar expressions and phrases, then his faith and confidence is hereby declared as being well established. Thoroughly rooted in vision and understanding, jnana dassana. And once the heart is thus finally settled in this invincible state, it is impossible for it to be shaken or converted by any recluse, Brahmin, Deva, Mara, Brahma, or anyone else in existence. That's why a person can come and say, hey, there's this teaching. Let's go to this teacher. There's this guru over here. You will say, no. There's this temple. Let's go there. Let's do some bowing. Let's do some chanting. It's okay. It's interesting. It's colorful. You will say, no. You go. I'll watch. Because you have found your island of safety. And nothing can shake you. Because you know it, and it's making you happy every time you're there. It is in this manner, bhikkhus, that one examines the teacher, the Tathagata, and his qualities according to the Dhamma. That is, through the validation of one's own understanding that is directly experienced in one's heart. By seeing for oneself the proof of the Dhamma taught by the Tathagata. This is what the Blessed One said, and the bhikkhus were delighted in hearing the Blessed One's words. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. A beautiful sutta, as you can see. There is a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. I think it's in the 90s, 97, 98 perhaps. I might be wrong. Brahmaya Sutta. And you had a very old, 100-year-old plus Brahmin who was knowledgeable. He was an expert, specialist of the Vedas. Every other Brahmin would go to him because he was the library of Vedic knowledge. A Brahmin. And he knew about the special, superhuman, if you will, that are recognized in the Vedas by 32 marks. And he had learned that there is in India at that time, Jambudvipa is another name for India. There was born in India at his time, and in a contemporary of his, a teacher with all the marks. But he could not travel all that distance because he was further, I believe he was in the south of India. So he sends one of his expert young apprentices, students, who was also an expert and specialist in the three Vedas. So he trusted him, and he sent him as a special envoy to spend time with Lord Buddha. And thanks to him, we have very detailed information about the daily life of Lord Buddha, how he would walk, how he would enter a room, how he would eat. For example, he always would walk in and out of rooms with his right foot. No morsel of food, no rice grain would go down his throat without first being touched by his teeth or his tongue or his palate with sati. He would taste every single grain of rice that he put in his mouth. He would walk, he would turn, they say, with the elephant's turn. The elephant, when it turns, it doesn't turn its head. It turns its entire body. So if somebody would say something on the street, let's say, usually the Buddhists or the practitioners would never talk to Buddha from the side. It's disrespectful. So they would present themselves in front in line of sight and bow and pay homage, and then they would address Lord Buddha with a question. But let's say walking on the street and something would happen. Lord Buddha would not turn like this. He would, or somebody would come and ask him. He would turn with his whole body. We get this thanks to a report that we got from this young Brahmin. Now, what he did also, which is extremely important and goes in line with today's Vīmaṁsaka Sutta, number 47, Majjhima Nikāya, is that when you want to scrutinize and investigate someone, don't just do it like offhandedly, just like quickly, with one impression. That is unwise, because you might pick up that moment where the bhikkhu or the teacher is just doing everything right. You see? So for that reason, Lord Buddha would always emphasize for us to spend some time with the teacher before we decide, you know what, this is a good teacher, I'm going to spend time with. I'm going to ask him to teach me. Because you might be impressed by the number of YouTube channel subscribers that they have, or the type of writing they've done. Today, you have teachers who write about Nibbana without having experienced it. Now, if you're the person reading it and the words used in the book are so flowery, and they make references in from the suttas or commentators, what are you going to think? How could you not think that this person must be enlightened? I'm going to get on a plane, in fact, 3, 4 planes, to get to this teacher on the other side of the planet and have him teach me. Now, sometimes the teachers can be fortunate and they would really find a good teacher like that. And we have had teachers, and it is my firm belief that there are still Arahant teachers in the world, good bhikkhus. I was mentioning one Arahant bhikkhu who died recently in the last few years, Bhante in Sri Lanka. But he was such a simple bhikkhu living in a small kuti somewhere in Sri Lanka, without affluence, without big monastery, without tons and tons of students to watch over him, to carry him. If you see the 26-second cremation video that I found somehow on YouTube, you will look and say, this was a bhikkhu's cremation of such a caliber? Yes. You don't need to be, you know, bombastic in your, fanfare of cremation. And your students need to know that, not to worship you. We don't even worship Lord Buddha. So, spending time personally witnessing is key. You do the same thing when you have your phone not working, right? You take your phone to a specialist who you know is a specialist. He's not a carpenter. He's a specialist of phone repair. If your eyes are hurting and you need surgery, you go to an eye doctor, not a tailor. Because if they are pretending to be somebody they're not, they will go to jail. Unfortunately, we don't have that standard when it comes to bhikkhus, sadly. If Lord Buddha was around, it would be similar to what happened with Venerable Moggaliputta Tissatera at the time of Emperor Ashoka. There were so many bhikkhus in the world, in India, and so few of them were actually practicing. And Venerable Moggaliputta Tissa saw that, and he tried to change the Sangha, to bring them back to the Dhamma, to the Vinaya. Nobody was listening. Everybody was after gaining affluence and influence. He just went to the mountains. He left. He said, the Dhamma is gone. And he was an Arahant. Later, when Emperor Ashoka takes on the Dhamma, Buddhism, and he becomes a devout Upasaka, he sees also what Venerable Moggaliputta saw himself. And he is upset. But because he's a ruler, and he's a no-nonsense kind of a ruler, and very puritanical in that sense, he starts to do a cleansing of the Sangha with the sword. Without asking questions, he would just see anybody who was accused of anything, he would just cut their heads. Not himself, but the executioners. So many people lost their lives, bhikkhus, because they were not living according to the Dhamma. And then he realizes that earlier he was killing soldiers and his own cousins on the battlefield. But now he's killing bhikkhus, albeit bad bhikkhus in his mind. But people are still being killed by his sword. He said, this is wrong. So he asks around. There must be bhikkhus that are good, that are real practitioners. What should we do? Is there one? And the news comes to him that, yes, Lord, there is a chief monk, an arahant, who has secluded himself. He has gone into self-exile in the mountains. He says, please go get him. We need him. He's the only one that can clear this mess. And I will give him 100% support. Tell him that. So he comes to the city and he says, oh, no, what have you done? You've killed so many people. He says, that's why I asked you to come, Bhante. So they give the option to these teachers, to these bhikkhus now, to these theros. Whoever wants to abide by the Vinaya, whoever wants to practice, whoever wants to really, really pursue the Dhamma for the right purposes in wearing the robes, they have to stand in this line. Whoever does not want to live according to that, then they must go back to the lay life. The Emperor Ashoka was not giving them the option of going back to lay life. He was just killing them. Here, Venerable Moggaliputta said, you have the option of going back to disrobe. So thousands of monks disrobed. Unfortunately, we don't have that mechanism in place anymore. So again, this is not to point fingers at this teacher or that teacher. It is to simply pass on to you the tools that Lord Buddha gave us to scrutinize and examine who is it that I am calling a teacher or my teacher. Our teacher is one, it's Lord Buddha. In fact, if he were alive, Lord Buddha would say, no, it's the Dhamma that is in your heart. Even that he would not take on as, I am your teacher. No. So I will stop here and pause for questions and comments. It's a hot topic. Some people don't want to touch. I have not seen any exploration or on this sutta as far as I can recall, because it's a very touchy sutta. It rattles the hornet's nest, as they say, but it is necessary. It is necessary if we want to maintain the Dhamma's purity. And we are losing the Dhamma. The Dhamma that we have today will not be around in 100 years if this state of affair continues. We need practitioners. We need true practitioners with Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Each of us, whoever you see in the mirror. But to support that, we need teachers who abide by the teachings that are found in the suttas, not whatever they think it is conjured up. So, are there any comments, thoughts, questions? Don't be shy. I guess I'm putting you guys on the spot. I said everything. Wow. I don't think so, but
This is the Book of the Force.
this is from the Majjhima Nikaya. Book of the Fours and all the way to the 11th is from the Anguttara Nikaya. And we also have a book 4 in the Sutta Nipata, where the 8s are found, Attakavagga. But was there a follow-up question to that? Yes, but if it was in relation to the Book of the Fours of the Anguttara, your question, perhaps I could try and answer if there is a question. Yes, it's Sutta number 47. Majjhima, the middle length discourses. Well, if there are no questions, why don't we transfer some merits? So please have both feet on the floor. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata devanagamahiddhika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhiya. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhiya. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhiya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.